The morning air hung thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning vegetation. Through the dense jungle canopy of South Vietnam, shafts of golden sunlight pierced the green darkness like spotlights on a stage no one wanted to be on. Private First Class Milton Lee Olive III crouched low behind a fallen teak tree, his M16 rifle clutched in trembling hands. He was 19 years old. Just 19. Back home in Chicago, his friends were worrying about college exams and weekend dates. But here, in this hell on earth, Milton was about to make a decision that would echo through the corridors of American military history forever. The crackling of automatic weapons fire erupted around him. Screams, American screams, cut through the jungle's symphony of chaos. His squad was pinned down, caught in a devastating ambush. The enemy bunker, concealed perfectly in the vegetation just 40 meters ahead, had turned their patrol route into a killing ground. Every second that bunker remained operational meant another American soldier might not see tomorrow. Milton's heart hammered against his ribs like a war drum. He looked at the faces of his brothers in arms, faces frozen in terror, determination, and the peculiar clarity that comes when death stands close enough to feel its cold breath. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be so extraordinary, so selfless, so utterly shocking in its courage, that it would challenge everything we think we know about human nature under fire. This is not just another war story. This is the story of how a 19-year-old U.S. soldier charged the enemy bunker, and what happened next shocked everyone. October 22, 1965. Approximately 1,430 hours. The Phu Quang district, near the village of Phu Loi, Bien Hoa Province, Republic of South Vietnam. The thick jungle terrain of this region had become a nightmarish chessboard where the Viet Cong held nearly every advantage. Private First Class Milton L. Olive III was serving with Company B, 2nd Battalion, Airborne, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne Brigade, one of the first major U.S. Army ground combat units deployed to Vietnam. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, nicknamed Sky Soldiers, had arrived in Vietnam just 5 months earlier, in May 1965, as America's military commitment to Southeast Asia escalated dramatically. On this particular autumn day, Olive's platoon was conducting a search-and-destroy mission through suspected Viet Cong territory. Intelligence reports had indicated enemy activity in the area, but the jungle was vast, the enemy invisible, and every shadow could hide death. The unit consisted of approximately 35 soldiers, moving in tactical formation through terrain so dense that visibility extended no more than 15 to 20 meters in any direction. Opposing them were elements of the Viet Cong 271st Regiment, battle-hardened guerrilla fighters who knew every meter of this jungle, every hiding place, every angle of attack. They had transformed the landscape into a deadly maze of concealed fighting positions, booby traps, and ambush points. The Americans were walking into a carefully prepared killing zone, and they didn't even know it yet. The temperature hovered around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity approaching 100%. Every soldier carried approximately 70 pounds of equipment, ammunition, water, rations, medical supplies, and the psychological weight of knowing that any step could be their last. To understand what happened that day, you must first understand who Milton Olive was before he became a hero. Milton Lee Olive III was born on November 7, 1945, in Chicago, Illinois, into a working-class African-American family during a time when the United States was still deeply segregated. His father, Milton Olive Jr., worked as a factory laborer, instilling in his son the values of hard work, dignity, and service. Young Milton grew up in the west side of Chicago, where he attended Mollison Elementary School and later Holy Family Academy. Those who knew him described Milton as quiet but friendly, someone who smiled easily and treated everyone with respect. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest, but there was something about him, a quiet strength, a dependability, that drew people to him. His teachers remembered him as a respectful student who never caused trouble. His friends remembered him as loyal, someone you could count on when things got tough. In 1964, at age 18, Milton made a decision that would change his life forever. Rather than waiting to be drafted, he voluntarily enlisted in the United States Army. When his father asked why he wanted to join, Milton's answer was simple and profound. "Dad, my country needs me." After completing basic training and advanced individual training, Milton volunteered for airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia, one of the Army's most physically demanding programs. He earned his paratrooper wings and was assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, an elite unit with a proud history dating back to World War II. By October 1965, Private First Class Olive had been in Vietnam for just 4 months. For months of patrols through suffocating jungle heat. For months of watching for tripwires and punji stakes. For months of seeing friends wounded or killed. For months of trying to identify an enemy that looked like farmers by day and soldiers by night. The war was changing him, hardening him, but it hadn't taken away his essential humanity, his concern for his fellow soldiers, his willingness to put others first. He was just 19 years old. Most 19-year-olds are just figuring out who they want to be. Milton was about to show the world exactly who he was. The patrol had been relatively quiet until approximately 1,430 hours. Company B was moving through a particularly dense section of jungle when the world exploded. The initial burst of fire came from multiple directions simultaneously, the classic L-shaped ambush favored by the Viet Cong automatic weapons fire, the distinctive crack of AK-47s, ripped through the jungle canopy. Green tracers, enemy tracers, streaked through the foliage like angry hornets. The Americans dove for cover, returning fire at muzzle flashes they could barely see. Lieutenant Marcus Johnson, the platoon leader, immediately recognized the tactical situation. They had walked into a prepared killing zone. The heaviest fire was coming from a fortified bunker position approximately 40 meters to their front, cleverly concealed beneath layers of vegetation and earth. The bunker's firing port offered the enemy a protected position from which to pour devastating fire into the American formation. "Suppressive fire on that bunker," Johnson shouted above the chaos. "Get some rounds in that position." American soldiers opened up with everything they had: M16 rifles, M60 machine guns, M79 grenade launchers. But the bunker was well constructed, probably reinforced with logs and sandbags beneath the camouflage. The 5.56mm rounds from the M16s were having little effect. They needed to get closer, to use grenades or heavier weapons to neutralize the position. But getting closer meant crossing 40 meters of open ground under heavy fire, a suicide mission. Private First Class Olive and 4 other soldiers from his squad found themselves pinned down together behind a slight rise in the terrain that offered minimal cover. Sergeant David Wilson, the squad leader, was assessing their options when Milton did something that nobody expected. "I'm going," Milton said quietly. "What?" Wilson turned to look at the young private. "That bunker. I'm going for it." "Olive, that's crazy. You'll never make it." Milton's eyes were calm, focused. "Somebody has to. We're all going to die here if that bunker stays active." Before anyone could stop him, Milton Lee Olive 3 rows from cover and began moving toward the enemy position. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for the soldiers who witnessed it, yet it also happened in the blink of an eye, the strange temporal distortion that combat creates. Milton moved in bounds, using every bit of available cover. He would sprint forward 10 or 15 meters, dive behind a tree or into a depression, then move again. Enemy fire tracked him, rounds impacting the ground around him, bark exploding from trees as bullets struck just inches from his body. It seemed impossible that he wasn't hit. His fellow soldiers, recognizing what Milton was attempting, increased their rate of fire, trying desperately to suppress the enemy bunker and give him a chance. The jungle erupted in a cacophony of violence. The staccato rhythm of automatic weapons, the deeper boom of grenade explosions, the shouts of men fighting for their lives. Milton covered 20 meters, then 30. The bunker was close now, so close he could see the muzzle flashes from its firing port. The Viet Cong inside had spotted him, recognizing the threat he posed. They concentrated their fire on this lone American soldier charging their position. 35 meters. Milton pulled a fragmentation grenade from his web gear, pulled the pin, and prepared to throw. Then something happened that nobody could have predicted. As Milton raised his arm to throw the grenade, a burst of automatic fire struck the ground directly in front of him. Instinctively, he stumbled, and the grenade, the pin already pulled, the spoon already released, slipped from his hand. It fell at his feet. For seconds, That's how long a standard M26 fragmentation grenade takes to detonate after the spoon releases. For seconds from safety mechanism to explosion. For seconds in which the grenade becomes a small bomb, generating metal fragments traveling at speeds exceeding 4,000 feet per second, capable of causing fatal wounds within a 5-meter radius. Milton looked down at the grenade. Around him, 4 other American soldiers were within that lethal radius: Sergeant Wilson, Private First Class Rodriguez, Specialist Davis, and Private Jackson. They hadn't seen the grenade fall. They were focused on the enemy, on survival, on the mission. If you're enjoying this journey through history, remember to subscribe to U.S. Last Stand, where we bring forgotten battles, hidden stories, and untold final stands of World War II and Vietnam War truths back to life. Time seemed to stop. Milton Lee Olive III, 19 years old, from the west side of Chicago, stood at a crossroads that exists beyond normal human experience. Every instinct, every cell in his body screamed at him to run, to dive away, to save himself. He had perhaps 2 seconds to make a decision. 2 seconds to weigh his own life against the lives of his brothers in arms. 2 seconds to determine what kind of man he truly was. In his mind, perhaps, flashed images of home, his father's face, his mother's embrace, the streets of Chicago, everything he would never see again. Perhaps he thought of growing old, of the family he might have had, of all the tomorrows that stretched out before him like an unwritten book. Or perhaps his mind was utterly calm, utterly clear, and the decision was simple. Without hesitation, without a moment of doubt, Private First Class Milton L. Olive III did something that defies comprehension. He threw himself on top of the grenade, using his own body to shield his fellow soldiers from the blast. "Grenade!" he shouted, his final word a warning to save others. The explosion was muffled, absorbed by Milton's body. The soldiers around him felt the concussion, heard the terrible sound, and turned to see their friend lying motionless on the jungle floor. What Milton Lee Olive III did in that moment, the conscious, deliberate sacrifice of his own life to save others, represents one of the most profound acts of courage and selflessness in American military history. He didn't stumble onto the grenade. He didn't fall on it by accident. He made a choice, in full knowledge of what that choice meant, to give everything so that others might live. Sergeant Wilson, Private First Class Rodriguez, Specialist Davis, and Private Jackson, all 4 survived without serious injury because of Milton's sacrifice. For men who went home to their families. For men who lived full lives, who had children and grandchildren, who grew old and told their children about a 19-year-old hero from Chicago who gave them the gift of tomorrow. The firefight continued for several more minutes before the Viet Cong withdrew into the jungle. When the shooting finally stopped, American soldiers secured the area and provided first aid to the wounded. But for Private First Class Milton Lee Olive III, there was nothing anyone could do. He had died instantly, his body absorbing the full force of the explosion that would have killed his friends. His fellow soldiers wept openly. Hardened paratroopers, men who had seen death before, stood with tears streaming down their faces as they looked at the body of their friend. He had been one of them, young, far from home, scared but determined. And in his final moment, he had shown a kind of love and courage that transcends all normal understanding. The news of Milton Olive's death traveled quickly through military channels. Company commanders, battalion commanders, brigade commanders, all recognized immediately that something extraordinary had occurred. The 4 soldiers whose lives Milton saved provided detailed statements about what they had witnessed. Their accounts were consistent, powerful, and deeply moving. On April 21, 1966, 6 months after Milton's death, President Lyndon B. Johnson presented the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration for valor in combat, to Milton's father and stepmother during a ceremony at the White House. Private First Class Milton L. Olive III became the first African American of the Vietnam War to receive the Medal of Honor. The citation read, in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." Private First Class Olive unhesitatingly, with complete disregard for his own safety, threw himself upon the grenade, absorbing the full and fatal force of the explosion with his body. Milton's father, Milton Olive Jr., accepted the medal with quiet dignity, though those present could see the grief etched into his face. His son, his boy, was gone. No medal, no matter how prestigious, could bring him back. But perhaps there was some small comfort in knowing that Milton's sacrifice meant something, that his life, though tragically short, had saved others. The city of Chicago, Milton's hometown, honored him by renaming a portion of McCormick Place Olive Park in his memory. An elementary school on Chicago's west side was renamed Milton L. Olive III Academy. These tributes ensured that future generations would know his name, would learn his story, and would understand what true heroism looks like. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, Milton's unit, established an award in his honor, the Milton L. Olive III Award, given annually to the soldier who best exemplifies the values of selfless service and sacrifice that Milton demonstrated. 59 years later, Sky soldiers still speak his name with reverence. But perhaps the most meaningful tributes came from the 4 men whose lives he saved. They carried the weight of that gift for the rest of their lives, the knowledge that someone had loved them enough to die for them. They named their children after Milton. They visited his grave. They told their grandchildren about a young paratrooper from Chicago who taught them the true meaning of courage. Milton Olive's story unfolded during a critical period in both the Vietnam War and the American Civil Rights Movement. In October 1965, the United States was rapidly escalating its military involvement in Southeast Asia. What had begun as a small advisory mission had grown into a full-scale combat operation involving hundreds of thousands of American troops. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, Milton's unit, was at the forefront of this escalation. These were the first major U.S. Army ground combat forces to deploy to Vietnam, and they quickly found themselves engaged in some of the war's earliest and most intense fighting. The soldiers of the 173rd were learning, in real time and at great cost, how to fight an enemy that utilized guerrilla tactics, that refused to engage in conventional battles, that melted into the population in the jungle. For African-American soldiers like Milton, the war held particular ironies and complexities. They were fighting for freedom and democracy in Southeast Asia, while their families back home were still struggling for basic civil rights in America. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been signed just 1 year before Milton's death, and the struggle for racial equality was far from over. Yet on the battlefield, the military was becoming one of America's most integrated institutions. In the foxholes and jungle clearings of Vietnam, soldiers of all races fought together, bled together, and died together. Racism didn't disappear. It would be naive to suggest otherwise, but combat has a way of revealing what truly matters. When someone is willing to throw themselves on a grenade to save your life, the color of their skin becomes utterly irrelevant. Milton's Medal of Honor was significant not just for his individual heroism, but for what it represented. Here was an African-American soldier being honored at the highest level by his country at a time when racial tensions were tearing America apart. His story offered a glimpse of America that could be, a nation that recognized and honored courage, service, and sacrifice regardless of race. Behind every war story, behind every statistic, behind every strategic analysis, are human beings, individuals with dreams, fears, loves, and losses. Milton Lee Olive III was not a statistic. He was not a casualty number. He was a son, a friend, a young man with his whole life ahead of him. His father carried the grief of Milton's loss for the rest of his days. In interviews years later, he would speak about his son with a mixture of immense pride and profound sadness. Pride that Milton had exemplified the values he had tried to instill in him. Sadness that his boy, his 19-year-old son, never got the chance to become the man he might have been. Think about everything Milton would never experience. He would never fall in love, never marry, never hold his own children. He would never attend college or start a career. He would never grow old, never see how the world changed, never know grandchildren or retirement or the quiet satisfactions of a life well lived. All of that was taken in an instant, sacrificed so that others could have those experiences. The soldiers who survived because of Milton's sacrifice carried that knowledge with them always. Several of them struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why they got to live when Milton didn't. They grappled with the question that haunts all survivors. How do you live a life worthy of such a gift? Sergeant David Wilson, the squad leader who tried to stop Milton from making his charge, later said, Every good thing I've done since that day, every time I've been a good father or husband or friend, I do it in honor of Milton. He gave me the chance to have a life. The least I can do is live it well. This is the true legacy of Milton L. All of three, not just the medal or the monuments, but the ripple effect of his sacrifice through time. The children and grandchildren of the men he saved, all of them alive because a 19-year-old from Chicago made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. If this story moved you, explore more forgotten heroes and untold sacrifices on U.S. Last Stand. Subscribe now and join us as we honor the courage of those who gave everything for freedom. These stories deserve to be remembered. These heroes deserve to be known. And history deserves to be told with the respect, depth, and emotion it commands. Thank you for watching. And remember, the greatest stands are often the ones history almost forgot.